Today we're diving into the catastrophic Texas floods that have left communities reeling and the Trump administration's disaster response under intense scrutiny. Stay with us as we unpack this unfolding crisis. On July 4, 2025, Central Texas was hit by a deluge of historic proportions. Torrential rains dumped up to 15 inches of water in hours, turning the Guadalupe River into a deadly force. Kerr County, in the heart of Texas Hill Country, bore the brunt, with floodwaters rising 22 feet in just 2 hours. This wasn't just a storm, it was a catastrophe that caught communities off guard. As of July 7, at least 80 people have lost their lives, including 28 children, with 41 still missing. Kerr County alone reported 68 deaths, many at Camp Mystic, a Christian girls' summer camp along the river. Rescue operations are ongoing, with over 850 people saved so far, but the scale of this tragedy has raised urgent questions about preparation and response. Camp Mystic, a nearly century-old institution, became a heartbreaking symbol of the disaster. At least 10 campers and 1 counselor remain unaccounted for, with cabins destroyed by floodwaters reaching 6 feet high. Parents and families are left in agony, awaiting news. The camp statement expressed gratitude for first responders, but highlighted the chaos as highways washed away. Texas Governor Greg Abbott declared a state of emergency, vowing a relentless response to locate every victim. He signed a disaster declaration for multiple counties, ensuring access to state resources. President Donald Trump followed with a federal disaster declaration for Kerr County, deploying FEMA and Coast Guard resources. But not everyone is satisfied with the response or what led to this tragedy. Speaking aboard Air Force One, President Trump called the floods shocking and terrible, promising federal aid. "We'll take care of them," he said, pledging coordination with state officials. Yet his administration's handling of this crisis has sparked fierce debate, with critics pointing to systemic failures that may have left Texas vulnerable. Let's dive into the political firestorm. At the heart of the controversy is the National Weather Service, or NOWS, accused by Texas officials of failing to predict the storm's severity. The NOWS issued a flood watch Thursday afternoon, followed by flash flood warnings early Friday. But local leaders claim the forecasts underestimated rainfall, leaving communities unprepared for the deluge that followed. Was this a failure of forecasting or something deeper? Kerrville City Manager Dalton Rice described the flooding as unprecedented, noting the Guadalupe River rose nearly 30 feet in under an hour. Local officials like Kerr County Judge Rob Kelly insist no one could have foreseen the scale of this disaster. Yet survivors like Christopher Flowers, who fled to his attic as waters rose, argue better warnings could have saved lives. Public frustration is boiling over, especially on platforms like X. One user wrote, "Trump gutted the National Weather Service. Now Texas is drowning and children are missing." Another demanded accountability for what they called dumbfuckery and mismanagement. These sentiments reflect growing anger over perceived failures in the lead up to the floods. But is the blame justified? The NOWS defends its actions, stating it issued a flood watch 12 hours in advance and flash flood warnings with over 3 hours lead time. Meteorologists argue the warnings were as accurate as possible given the unpredictable nature of flash flooding. Still, questions linger about whether staffing shortages and federal cuts hindered their ability to coordinate effectively. Let's explore this further. The Trump administration's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, has been a lightning rod for criticism. Led by figures like Elon Musk, DOGE slashed nearly 600 NOWS staffers in recent months, part of broader cuts to NOAA, the NUS's parent agency. Former NOAA Director Rick Spinrad warned these reductions could degrade forecasting capabilities, potentially costing lives. NOAA lost 17% of its workforce under Trump's 2025 budget, with key positions like warning coordination meteorologists left vacant. The Austin San Antonio NOWS office was missing 6 staffers, including a critical coordinator role, when the floods hit. Critics argue these shortages hampered communication with local officials, leaving gaps in the warning chain. Democratic Congressman Joaquin Castro called for an investigation into the NOWS cuts, stating it's not helpful to have key personnel missing when lives are at stake. He argued that understaffing may have delayed critical warnings. Castro's comments echo a broader Democratic push to tie the tragedy to Trump's cost-cutting agenda. But the administration is pushing back hard. White House spokesperson Abigail Jackson called criticism of the NOWS shameful and disgusting, insisting the agency did its job. President Trump himself dismissed claims that cuts impacted the response, calling the floods a 100-year catastrophe no one could predict. He even suggested the staffing issues were a Biden setup, deflecting blame to his predecessor. Experts like meteorologist Chris Vygotsky argue that predicting flash floods is notoriously difficult. The NUS's quantitative precipitation forecasts underestimated the rainfall, but the agency still issued timely warnings. The real issue, some say, was the lack of local warning systems in Kerr County, which relies heavily on federal alerts due to budget constraints. Kerr County Judge Rob Kelly admitted the county lacks a unified flood warning system, citing high costs and taxpayer resistance. The public reeled at the expense, he said. This gap left residents like those at Camp Mystic reliant on NOW's alerts, which may not have reached everyone in time, especially in the dead of night. Local officials considered a flood warning system years ago but abandoned it due to costs. Survivors like Aaron Burgess, who clung to a tree as floodwaters rose, say a louder, more direct alert could have made a difference. The absence of such systems has fueled accusations that both local and federal governments failed to prioritize public safety. Trump's broader disaster policy has also come under fire. He's proposed phasing out FEMA after the 2025 hurricane season, shifting responsibility to states. Critics argue this approach leaves places like Texas, prone to extreme weather, dangerously underprepared. The Texas floods have become a flashpoint in this debate, with lives hanging in the balance. On X, critics like musician Michael Jollett have linked the floods to Trump's rollback of climate change policies. Project 2025 thought weather prediction was tied to climate change, he posted, accusing the administration of gutting NOWs to avoid acknowledging global warming. These claims, while unproven, highlight the intersection of politics and disaster response. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem defended the administration, promising to modernize NOW's ancient systems. She acknowledged public concerns but insisted the floods were unpredictable, comparing them to Hurricane Harvey. Noem's pledge to upgrade technology has done little to quell criticism, as families demand answers for why warnings fell short. The human toll of the floods is staggering. Families of Camp Mystic campers are enduring an excruciating wait, with some confirming the deaths of loved ones like 8-year-old Renee Smijstrela. Social media is flooded with pleas for information, as communities rally to support survivors. The tragedy has united Texans in grief but also in anger. On X, hashtags like #TrumpDidThis are trending, reflecting public outrage. One user wrote, "Our government is supposed to protect us, not kill us with mismanagement." Others praise first responders but demand investigations into NOW's cuts. The polarized reactions underscore the deep divide over Trump's leadership in crises. Media outlets have been quick to scrutinize the administration. The Texas Observer warned that DOGE cuts could leave the state in peril, while the New York Times highlighted vacant NOW's roles as a factor in the tragedy. These reports frame the floods as a failure of federal preparedness, amplifying calls for accountability. Washington Governor Jay Inslee tied the floods to climate change, criticizing Trump's cuts to green energy funding. These torrential rains are more frequent because of climate change, he said. Democrats argue that dismantling NOAA's climate research, as proposed in Project 2025, weakens the nation's ability to predict and respond to extreme weather. Republicans like Texas Representative Chip Roy defend the response, calling the floods a once-in-a-century event. Roy acknowledged public frustration but cautioned against Monday morning quarterbacking. He praised first responders and urged focus on recovery, sidestepping questions about NOW's cuts. This divide highlights the political tightrope in disaster response. First responders have been hailed as heroes, with over 400 personnel from 20 agencies conducting rescues. The Coast Guard and Texas National Guard have deployed helicopters and boats, saving hundreds. Governor Abbott declared July 6 the Day of Prayer, reflecting the state's resolve to recover amid ongoing search efforts. FEMA's deployment has been swift, with grants for temporary housing and low-cost loans for uninsured losses. Benjamin Abbott, named federal coordinating officer, is overseeing recovery in Kerr County, but Trump's plans to phase out FEMA have raised concerns about long-term support for flood victims. On X, some users defend Trump's response, citing rapid FEMA deployment and Coast Guard rescues. Trump acted quickly to help Texas, one post read. These voices contrast with critics, showing a split in public perception. Supporters argue the administration is doing all it can in an unprecedented crisis. The floods have left Kerrville's infrastructure in tatters, with bridges impaled by debris and roads washed out. The economic toll is still being assessed, but rebuilding will take years. Local officials are now under pressure to explain why flood-prone areas lacked robust warning systems or evacuation plans, even internationally. The Texas floods have resonated. Pope Leo XIV, the first American pontiff, offered condolences from the Vatican, praying for families who lost children at Camp Mystic. The global attention underscores the scale of the tragedy and the universal demand for answers. This isn't the first time the Guadalupe River has turned deadly. In 1987, a similar flash flood killed 10 teenagers and injured 33 after 5 to 10 inches of rain fell. The river crested at 31.5 feet, much like this year's disaster. That event led to calls for better warning systems, yet Kerr County still lacks them. The 2017 Hurricane Harvey floods offer another parallel. Harvey dumped unprecedented rain on Houston, exposing gaps in disaster preparedness. Like today, critics blamed federal and state failures, but recovery efforts eventually strengthened infrastructure. The Texas floods of 2025 are reigniting these debates with comparisons to Harvey's unpredictability. Nationally, Superstorm Sandy in 2012 killed 147 people and exposed FEMA's limitations. The Obama administration faced scrutiny for slow aid distribution, much like Trump's current challenges. Sandy led to reforms in federal disaster response, but Trump's push to decentralize FEMA could reverse those gains, critics warn. In the 1980s, NW's technology was rudimentary compared to today, yet flash flood warnings saved lives. Modern systems, despite advancements, rely on staffing and coordination. The 2025 cuts to NW's echo past underfunding issues that led to forecasting errors, raising questions about lessons unlearned. During his 2024 campaign, Trump repeatedly criticized FEMA, calling it bloated and inefficient. His January 2025 executive order aimed to overhaul the agency, aligning with his push for state-led disaster response. The Texas floods are now testing this philosophy, with critics arguing it's left vulnerable communities exposed. Texas has faced a string of climate-driven disasters, from wildfires to hurricanes. The 2021 winter storm and recent wildfires exposed gaps in state preparedness. Critics argue that Texas's resistance to climate change planning, coupled with federal cuts, creates a perfect storm for disasters like the 2025 floods. NOAA data shows a sharp rise in billion-dollar weather disasters, with climate change amplifying storms and floods. Texas, a hotspot for such events, faces increasing risks. Trump's plan to dismantle NOAA's climate research, as outlined in Project 2025, could further weaken the nation's ability to prepare, experts say. Under Obama, NOAA received significant funding to improve forecasting and climate research. These investments strengthened NOAA's capabilities, but Trump's cuts have reversed much of that progress. The Texas floods highlight the consequences of prioritizing budget reductions over public safety, according to critics. Other flood-prone regions, like California, have invested in early warning systems with sirens and automated alerts. Texas's failure to adopt similar measures, despite its history of flash floods, has left communities like Kerrville reliant on federal agencies now strained by cuts. This gap is a recurring theme in Texas disasters. The 1987 Guadalupe River flood led to memorials and promises of reform, yet 38 years later, history seems to repeat. The 2025 tragedy has reignited calls for local and federal investment in warning systems, with survivors demanding accountability to prevent future losses. The parallels are striking and sobering. Rescue efforts continue as more rain looms, with the NOAA's warning of flash flooding through Monday night. Kerr County remains on high alert, with crews searching for the missing, including Camp Mystic campers. The immediate priority is saving lives, but the long-term questions are just beginning to surface. FEMA's disaster assistance includes grants for housing and repairs, but Trump's plan to phase out the agency by November 2025 raises concerns. Will Texas receive the long-term support it needs? Critics fear a state-led approach could leave rural areas like Kerr County underfunded and vulnerable. Democrats like Joaquin Castro are pushing for congressional investigations into NOAA's cuts. If approved, these probes could expose systemic issues in Trump's cost-cutting agenda. Republicans, however, may frame the floods as an unavoidable tragedy, deflecting blame from federal policies. The outcome could shape disaster policy for years. The NOAA is hiring 100 new staffers to address vacancies, but this is a fraction of the 600 lost. Experts say rebuilding forecasting capacity will take years, leaving Texas and other states at risk in the meantime. The 2025 hurricane season, predicted to be above average, looms large. The floods have reignited climate change debates. Democrats argue that ignoring global warming exacerbates disasters, while Trump's allies dismiss these claims as politicization. Texas's refusal to mandate climate planning for state agencies could complicate future preparedness, experts warn. In Kerrville, communities are rallying to rebuild. Volunteers are clearing debris and local businesses are donating supplies. But the emotional and economic scars will linger, with families demanding answers about why warnings failed and what will change to protect them in the future. Trump plans to visit Texas on Friday, July 11th, to survey the damage and meet with officials. His visit could be a chance to project leadership, but it risks amplifying criticism if survivors feel neglected. The optics of this trip will be closely watched, especially amid calls for accountability. NOAA's proposed cuts, including eliminating climate research labs, could hinder future forecasting improvements. Experts warn that without robust data, predicting extreme weather will become harder. The Texas floods may force a reckoning on how the U.S. prepares for a warming world. Texas Hill Country, known as Flash Flood Alley, will face more storms as the 2025 hurricane season ramps up. Without local warning systems and restored federal resources, the region remains vulnerable. The tragedy of July 2025 could be a wake-up call or a grim preview of what's to come. As Texans mourn, the focus is shifting to prevention. Will the federal government restore NW's funding? Will local leaders invest in warning systems? The lives lost in Kerr County demand action, and the nation is watching to see if lessons will finally be learned. That's our deep dive into the Texas floods and the Trump administration's response. What do you think? Did federal cuts contribute to this tragedy, or was it an unavoidable disaster? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe for more political news.